founder building India's largest lifestyle brand, founder and CEO of India's fastest growing startup, Adit Palecha of Zepto, Vasant Kamath, who's the co-founder and CEO of Smallcase, which is one of India's leading fintech startups, being Rohan Meechandani, the co-founder of one of India's most loved brands, Epigamia.
We connected last week and I already said this to you, but again, to be on the record, I am beyond impressed by how you conduct your podcast, the Indian Silicon Valley. You know, from the questions you ask, how articulate you are, the 2 cents you give after an answer, how great of a listener you are. I don't think people understand it takes so many nuances for the podcast to have such a great flow. So please describe, like, how did you get started and what did your journey look like?
Sure. I think going down memory lane is always super exciting. But for me, it was very serendipitous in terms of the podcast because it was born out of curiosity. I was 21 at the time and I was figuring out a bunch of things, what's next in life. And as somebody with very little exposure to entrepreneurship, my only means to understand more about startups was content. And when I realized that as a youngster, I wanted to start a company, I felt the need that there needed to be more in-depth conversation with founders where I could understand how to build a company in more detail than I was already getting exposure to.
Right.
And then I resorted to a lot of the US content that was there, but I couldn't contextualize it. And so I realized that, okay, since there is no resource which fits my type of content, why don't I go out there and create it, because I get to learn firsthand. And I'm sure there are more people like me who want to start companies and want to learn from some of the best folks in the country who've been there, done that, and are doing so in front of us.
Yeah.
And so with that thought, almost naively, I didn't know enough to contemplate on whether or not I should start. I only knew that, okay, this is a white space according to me. I knew I would be curating content for my kind of persona. And so I started, and it's lovely how far it's come. If you were to ask me, did I know, I end up doing like 95 odd episodes, be on it week on week for almost 2 years? I probably didn't. But the only thing I knew was that I'm going to, dedicate my heart into it because I really wanted to learn. And that's the beauty of curiosity, right? And that's also like part of it is not having too many expectations. But I started, almost verily. I remember the first couple of episodes were me reading out of a script and trying to, mimic everything and make it as theatrical. So from those days and coming along and, getting articulate has been like one part of the podcast, but it's just the fact that I have learned so much firsthand. And I think that reflects in what I am trying to do. And that's the best part about what I do. And very often I tell myself the same thing, that no matter what the output, I know if I put my heart into the entire process, which is research well, think of questions which can deeply bring out insightful learnings from the guest, and then bring it out there, I'm sure if not anybody else, I'm going to end up learning a lot. And as long as I keep that motto alive, I think I have a long way to go and the learning is going to be infinite. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been, some sort of genesis of how the podcast came to light, what was the primary motivation of me starting, and how much I've transformed through the journey.
That's amazing. When did you do your first episode?
My first episode was released on 16th August, but I started recording in May, June. In hindsight, I took almost 1-2 months because I was obsessed with the fact that I didn't want to miss any week. I probably wouldn't have done that because I realized that I had curated 7-8 odd episodes which I had to release, but any feedback that I was getting, which was of prime importance, especially early on, I was not being able to, let's say, give back to the podcast, right? Because I'd already recorded 7-8.
Yeah.
So that was one. But this was August 16th, 2020 is when I first published my first episode. And it's been a long time since. At least feels like it, although it's not even, it's going to be 2 years now.
That's amazing. And it's very, very hard to build an audience on YouTube. So initially, these were your initial first videos that you released on YouTube? So how did you get that
Oh,
audience that was able to give you feedback?
right. No, I think so. YouTube actually came later for me. I started off with a low mechanism, which is, let's say, low friction mechanism, which is audio, and that still
Oh, I
remains to be
see.
my one of my primary channels. But I think the first couple of times I was also, wondering, and I continue today as to where do I find my audience, right? Because
Right.
now that a flywheel exists, I still want it to continuously grow. I think a good rule of thumb that I've planned is, just like it's much like anything else. You just have to figure out a way that suits you best. For me, it was multiple things. It was almost, if I can use that word, shamelessly approaching people for feedback, right? Why don't you give
Right.
this a listen? I'm sure you learn and give me some feedback. And I'll just go ahead, pester
Yeah.
my friends, my close family and folks, and be like,
Yeah.
what do you think of this? With time, it became more systematic. I started approaching more people like myself. So since I was just out of college, I realized that, okay, who are other folks that can take advantage of this? More people like me who exist in these entrepreneurship clubs on campus at university, right? And I
Right.
realized these are the folks who are most they're the closest to the audience that I want. They know what they are doing. They
Yeah.
anyway like to, get people invited for speaking sessions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Why don't I get them involved? So that was another great hook. At the initial days really has become a flywheel today. There are people who've listened to my podcast for a year now because of those
Yeah.
early initiations that I had made. And then the rest of it was I started a WhatsApp newsletter, and that in hindsight
How
turned out to be
interesting.
an interesting insight.
Yeah.
What I would do is whenever posting something on social, an episode, I put up another link which would be like, if you want to, get these episodes directly on your WhatsApp, which is in India, one of the most common means of communication. Why don't you go ahead and click on this link? And very intuitively, a lot of people started clicking on that link. This was a very easy WhatsApp business account that I had made from an alternative number that I had handy. And I started
Right.
communicating with people, and it was very raw feedback. Like a lot of people told me, like very simply, that, okay, this is probably too long. Why don't you try Hindi? Why don't you do this, that? And that became like a really interesting loop because people felt very connected. I mean,
Yeah.
and when I think of it, right, if I listen to a podcast and I can get to interact with the host of that, I think
Yeah.
that puts me on a great stead. It makes me feel like I'm
Definitely.
more like a part of the
Accessible,
podcast
yeah.
itself. Yeah, and so I think that was the other thing that worked out well. But I think a pure combination of initial hustle and just like sweating it out and figuring out is what gets anybody their first core group of, listeners, or be it viewers or anything of the kind. And then you just have to consistently deliver on top of it, because then
Yeah.
people, I mean, one person, I think this was another podcaster who told me that people will come to your podcast once because of XYZ reason, but they'll stay back for you.
Yeah.
And that was like a
100%.
really light bulb sort of a moment
Yeah.
where I realized, okay, I have to curate the best quality of content and then leave it up to the flywheel for them to come once. And if they like the content, they'll hopefully come back again. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, definitely it's extremely hard to, get those initial number of, viewers and audience. But the fact that they stay is something that's on you. That's not a hustling. There are no tactics to getting your audience to stay. Your content has to be good. It has to be like quality stuff which brings people value. So that is amazing, how you like really, really worked hard to get that initial batch of viewership and then have your content be extremely valuable and qualitative enough for them to stay. Like, that's amazing. And me having watched your podcast, I exactly know why people stay, because the effort you put in, like, it is something that shows. So it's actually a big favor for like the viewer to be able to get access to that content. You said you've done over like 95 episodes and stuff. So what would you say were the pivotal changes that you made, some key improvements that made your podcast dramatically better?
Yeah, one was the realization that if I'm going to be a good host, I have to invest time and resource on it. And as intuitive as that may sound, I've seen very few, again, due to no fault of anybody, I've seen very few people resort to resources to get better at what they're doing, especially hosting, because people tend to run off hosting as something that comes naturally to you. Either you're a conversationalist or you're not, either you have a style or not. But I think that preparation can drastically improve one. So I think getting more structure and having the recognition all along the way to date, when I, resort to a bunch of resources to understand, okay, what am I doing? How can I get better? And what are the things that can make me better, right? So I think that was one constant thread. But in terms of pivotal moments, I think for the first 15 to 20 odd episodes, I used to discount myself a lot, which is to say that, okay, my job is to, let's say, simply ask, right? And not anything else. But the recognition that, okay, you have to take more command over the conversation was one thing that was a game changer in some shape or form. The other was to keep an open mind. Very often we can confuse preparation with, let's say, like a lot of structure, right? That may not be essentially good, although like there needs to be a good balance that can, you have to figure out for yourself. But I realized that I can't just be very, very, very structured. I have to keep room for a bunch of rabbit holes. And that brings me to the point of listening, right? Because I've always thought of myself as somebody who can't concentrate for long amounts of time. But I think one of the core traits that podcasting at least teaches you, or any type of interview, is that it's more important to listen carefully to the answer than it is to deliver a good question. Because unless you're listening well enough, you're probably not being able to make the right connections or be the voice of the audience. I think that was an important learning. And I started resorting to, long form content. So I now listen to 3-4 hour podcast episodes in durations of time so that I can tend to, listen to them. So that was something. The third was listening to more diverse content. I realized that I can't continue staying in, just the world of startups, or I can't get better unless I resort to something that you're doing, or something that a psychology podcast is doing, or something that, a very open-ended decision-making. The Knowledge Project, for instance, is one of my favorite podcasts, what they are doing, right? And that was, again, a change, because I realized that for the longest time, I used to just surround myself with the same kind of Masters of Scale, 20-minute VC, all of the same kind of content. And I was just in that bubble of, the same type of flywheel. But then when I expanded my content, I realized, okay, there's so much to do. There can be so many different styles. I can do this, I can do that. And my perspective opened up drastically. So I think just having the constant recognition that, okay, at each step I wanted to question myself, and I continue doing so. I think I'm far from perfect like anybody else, and this is like going to be a journey, and I'm happy to invest in it. But having that recognition really matters. So I think these were some of the things that I have done over time, and then just making it more natural and authentic with time. That's something I had a tough time to initially understand, because I was like, okay, I'll have to be the know-it-all person. I'll have to be on my guard. I can't slip up or anything of the kind. But just getting rid of those reservations and being yourself, right? And without any fear of any kind, and having the confidence that it's okay, like it's going to be a conversation, and staying true to your roots, which for me was, okay, I'm here to learn. How can I do that the best? I think having these recognitions along the way really helped me bring out my natural side and explore so much about myself that I didn't know, right? Because very often I say in my friend circles that if you knew me 3 years back, you'd probably not have imagined me having a podcast which is running for almost 2 odd years, and I'm sure I'll learn for more because I love it so much. So I have explored so much through the journey about myself, and I think that's one of the most important aspects as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think those are very, very things that definitely dramatically can change the game for anyone. And I was just gonna say, those things really helped you also improve so much as a person, right? Broaden your horizon. So many times we just stick to oh, I like business and that's exactly what I'd like to consume. But for you to think about, if I want to become a better host, I want to consume things I would not otherwise, like you said, psychology, or tech, or different things and stuff. And I feel like your growth as a person reflects in the improvement of your episodes. And the trajectory that your work is taking. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was extremely valuable. And I'd like to ask you, like, some of the guests you have on your podcast are some of the people who are very, very hard to access. So what does your process look like to secure guests for the Indian Silicon Valley podcast?
Yeah, I think I could go on and on for this one because I think it's been such a interesting one, right? Again, I mean, a bit of naivety helps here because every time somebody told me that I couldn't get somebody, it was almost like, why not? And I didn't know any better, so I just go after them anyway and stay at it. So I think a bit of process helps, which I'm there now. But I think in the initial days, it's just about a lot of good patience and a lot of good perseverance, right? So the thing about a podcast or any kind of content, especially if you're there in the long haul, which is a different mindset that you have to develop over time. Because if I would be expecting that, okay, in my first 6 months, I'm going to get the who's who of the Indian founder circle, then I'm probably not going to achieve it because that's just setting myself up for failure because it doesn't happen that quick. At least it didn't in my case, not that I came from a network or anything of the kind. So I had to build it out from scratch. Having said that, I just kind of just kept at it. I would email people and every month I just follow up. And I have stories where I have been at it for people for 9-10 months, for a year as well, and eventually gotten them on, right? And the simple theory that I had, and I often say is that if you never try, you never know. So type that email. If they've not said no, they probably it's not a priority for them right now, or they're interested but not yet convinced. What can you do to make them convinced over a period of time? And if you keep at it, you eventually catch their attention. It's almost like, I used to send them updates that, okay, if I've, emailed somebody 2 months back, I'll be like, since then I've now hosted 10 odd episodes. These are the people, these are the conversations I've had. Why don't you check them out? And if you like it, I'd love to still host you on whenever you have some time. And I think just doing that helps. So I think ambition really helps. So, I mean, unless you say you can do it, you definitely cannot. So write to the who's who of the world, and I'm sure they'll reply, because it boils down to, they're fundamentally, everybody's human, right? So if they recognize you're trying to do something different and valuable, I think inevitably people respond because they are they want to also share what they have and they feel nice about it, but you have to give them a reason. So I think the other thing is, don't just write emails for the sake of them or whatever your channel be. I've converted people through Twitter DMs. I've converted people through Instagram DMs. I've converted people through LinkedIn DMs, through emails, right? And it's been a fantastic journey. So all I can say is just, if you want somebody to come on and if you definitely have tangible reasons to, put it in words and approach them in ways that can actually catch their eye. And if you've been true to yourself, they inevitably should respond. And most people do. You'd be surprised by the number of people who do, where I also maybe, felt that they'll probably not respond, or why will they? But I think people eventually come around. So yeah, that works.
I love your mindset and your approach towards getting to people. It's such an amazing thing you said, they're all humans. Sometimes we, make these big walls in front of us and put people on such a high pedestal and get intimidated by them. But like you said, these guys are human, and so many of them are so down to, share their story beyond just business, and so down to help young people, to further their podcast or, content or anything that they are on their journey. So, and also the importance of follow-ups. That is so important. And like you said, being patient and stuff, all those things really come to play. The next thing I wanted to ask you is, how did you get started working with AngelList India? What did that journey look like?
Yeah, so I think AngelList was a very interesting journey, and I feel incredibly lucky to have landed up here. Post-college, I had a job in finance, but I decided to not take that because it didn't feel like a logical next step, considering the kind of things I was doing, including the podcast. And so I started to get involved with startups. I did a couple of volunteering gigs. I did a couple of freelance gigs. And then I realized that, okay, I want to join a company. And this was an early stage venture, but that didn't work out for me. And this was a 4 months long stint, and I realized that, okay, while I love startups, that was not how it worked out for me. And so I came across the AngelList opportunity. There was an opening. I'd read a lot about the founder of AngelList, which is Nawal. And in India as well, I'd read a lot about AngelList, India's founder, which is Utsav Somani. He's done incredibly well in the early stage activity ecosystem of India.
Right.
And I was like, okay, if I get to be here, for me, I was trying to prioritize people, trying to prioritize the kind of culture and learning. And the rest of the things didn't matter as much. And I felt that all three buckets were being successfully filled at an organization like AngelList.
Yeah.
I applied, and when I applied, I remember it was like saying that it requires 1 to 2 years of work experience, which I did not have at the time. But then I went overboard. I wrote an application. I was very hopeful, and thankfully things turned out well. And I was really glad to join a team of, I think we were 8 people at the time, and I was the youngest member there. I think I'm still the youngest, but to have the kind of people alongside me who could, who were willing to make me learn, who were willing to give me responsibility and ownership, because, agile teams give you that. And the kind of work we've been able to do since, I think I feel incredibly thankful, because I think I have a center seat to the early stage ecosystem in India, where I get to interact with founders, with a lot of angel investors, with a lot of GPs, which are syndicate leads on the platform. And I think it's just wonderful that very early on in my career, I've been able to get this. And so very thankful about it. But that's the brief story of how I got here.
That's amazing. So did you end up cold emailing to them, or did you end up writing a cover letter to apply? How did you get through?
Yeah.
I think it's not a joke for you to be able to get into such a great company, because the hiring process in India is pretty rigid. They do require a college degree. They do require, that work X. So for you to be able to crack this, I think it's amazing, and a lot of people need to learn from him. So I would love to for you to expand on it.
Yeah. No, I think so. This was one of those opportunities where I did apply through normal channels, which was to say that, okay, there was an application where I had to submit my resume, and there was a cover letter alongside it. Then there was a submission process in which, there was a investment thesis that I had to make, right? And I remember that thesis said that, okay, you can do 1 to 2 pages, but I went ahead, wrote a 6-8 page thing, and I used to go overboard with everything. In fact, it's interesting. I remember asking a year, 6 months back, and a year post when I got in, why was I chosen, right? Because let's say I didn't have experience, at least on paper. But I think the podcast definitely helped, right? Because that showed a sense of curiosity, and I feel that's been central to my identity as I've grown as well. But I think just going the extra mile and having the podcast to show that, okay, there is more to my credentials than what a piece of paper will show.
Right.
I think that kind of helped me, because trust me, I was as surprised as you are to have gotten through, because it is because coming from a non-technical background and things like that, I had my reservations for myself. But the fact that I was able to break in a great organization with one of the most lovely cultures that I can probably tell you about, it was just a pleasure, and continues to be to date, right? So I think while the application process was through normal channels, I think what stands out is just going overboard. If you genuinely want something, just give it your all, because there are no points for giving less. You can give it a shot, and there were times that I didn't get through as well, right? In the past, I had been trying for a bunch of places, but when I did, I think it was the best thing that happened to me, and it remains to be a great place to work upon, which gives me the freedom to work on my podcast, to do multiple other things as well, as long as I'm giving it my all at work. And that's the best part of being just surrounded by great people.
I'm super happy for you. It sounds like you love your job. It's an amazing learning experience, and it really coincides to what you're very, very passionate about, which is the Indian startup scene. I'm super excited for you, and I think that you are also an amazing asset for them. And I don't think age at all matters. You've shown how curious you are. You're a go-getter. You persevere, and you know how to get indoors. So I think it's phenomenal. And on that note, I would really like to ask you, what would you say is your story as a person, from when you were born to bred to today?
Interesting. I don't know if I've thought about myself as a story, but I often think of things like growing up, it was a very simple life, and I loved it that way, right? Because we used to go to school. The goal was to get academically excellent, do good at school, come back, do your homework, play around with friends. And it was very simplistic, and that's great, right? I think what's differentiated and changed the way is I knew that I always wanted to do something different. I didn't know how at the time, but it always felt that even in that simplistic nature, it felt like I wanted to do something different. And along the way, there were doubts that came along because, I mean, a bunch of things happened, right? But I think to date, all I continue doing is if we can give it if one can give it their heart. So when I'm trying to do the podcast or at work or with anything else that I'm planning for the future, I think without any reservations, if you can just very honestly approach it with dedication, I think it works out in some shape or form. The maturity that's now come in is I feel that there is something special to be made out of this. And so I know that there's a larger opportunity in front of me. And as they say, I think with some sort of, a couple of wins along the way, you feel like, there's much more to be done. And that's the drive that makes me really get up every morning and keep at it despite everything, right? And so that has become something. But at the core, it's just, I think I try to think of myself as somebody who's simple, honest, and wants to do something different. And I think as long as I can keep that core alive, I'll be able to figure out something, because while some of the times, it gets complicated with a full-time job, with a podcast that I feel is full-time, I almost hate it when somebody says, okay, are you doing this part-time or something of the kind, right? Because I think it's a part of life. Of course, I don't dedicate 50 hours a week to it, but that does not in any way mean that it's a part-time thing. Yeah. But anything, I mean, considering that there are multiple moving parts to what I'm doing, I think the confidence and belief that, okay, something more awaits you is very important for me. And that's something that I try to believe. But yeah, I think just approaching things in an honest, dedicated way has been my mantra, if at all I have one. And that's the story for me.
That's amazing. You really give off the vibe of, just being like amazing. I love your energy. Even the first time we had an interaction, it was like a 10-minute thing. And I could just say that, you're genuine, sincere, and all of that really translates on camera, You can only like put up a persona for so long. When you're creating content at scale for a long time, and you've been doing that for 2 years, like you can't fake it that long, right? So I must say, like, it reflects, and it really, like, I feel like it serves an inspiration to a lot of people that, you don't have to try and be somewhere you're not. You can be yourself, you can learn, you can appreciate, and, you can go follow your dreams and really, like, work hard towards achieving them. So thanks for being you. And I want to ask you, so like doing a podcast, having a job, also having a personal life, all of these things really require you to show up all the time, right? You're also like very dedicated in terms of sticking to a schedule and being disciplined about how many times a podcast is getting released in a month. How do you deal with things like mental health? How do you try and show up on tough days?
I mean, it's one of the most crucial pointers, and it's something that I spend time thinking about a lot as to, how I want to proactively manage it. I'm not sure if I do a great job at it, but part of it just comes along with embracing the journey, right? So I think a lot of times what we tend to do is, let's say, we prepare for something and get on a journey without understanding the consequences of what it will mean, right? Because we want the end goal that much, we forget to look at the kind of effort and hard work that'll go into it. I think now what I'm trying to do is becoming cognizant of, okay, this is the kind of effort it's going to bring. This is the kind of balance I'll need to have. It'll be 80-20, 90-10. It won't be 50-50. And am I okay with that? As long as we can take a conscious choice about that, okay, I'm going to spend 15 hours a week on the podcast, irrespective of everything, right? That's a choice I'm making. And I need to be okay with that choice. If I end up 6 months down the line regretting that choice, it needs to be a fight with myself. But I can't not have that cognizance along with me, because I don't want to end up in a quarter and be like, I'm overworking myself. That's what I signed for. I mean, if I've signed up for that, I need to follow through. So I think in terms of mental health, or balance, or how I deal with myself, having a strong support network helps. I think I'm not the most expressive person, to be honest, and that is kind of something that I'm trying to work upon. But just surrounding yourself with well-wishers, right? Good friends, family, and supporters, and having good mentors out there really helps. And then just being true to yourself about the kind of game you're playing, right? I think that's something I've learned by hosting folks on my podcast. And I would like to really mention that I think entrepreneurs are perhaps they're not the most balanced folks, but they do know what they're in it for, and they embrace the journey incredibly well, because it's not like a high for them is too high or a low for them is too low. For them, every day is a firefighting battle, and they're okay with that because they've signed up for that, and they look at the 10-year goal that they have, so they're able to continue showing up. So that is what a choice means, and one of the guests on my show, in fact, elucidates that very well. And so personally, I've tried to, I think, become better at being honest to myself. I don't think it's ever a problem of time. I think very often this quote is used. It's not a matter of time, it's a matter of priority. So if things are important to us, we end up making time for it inevitably. So I guess as this journey evolves for me, I'll become better at it. But currently, I try to prioritize things and be intellectually honest to myself. Very often it's very easy to fool ourselves that, okay, I don't have time for health, or I don't have time for my family, or I don't have time for whatnot, right? Or I don't have time for reading. But if it's a priority, you'll figure it out, and you need to. So I think that matters, and just keeping at it and knowing. I mean, I'm a huge fan of compounding now, only because I've seen it. And had I not seen it with the podcast, I probably wouldn't be able to say it, because I mean, all of us, since we know arithmetic, have understood what compounding looks like in theory, but to practice it and see the real life impacts are great. So I largely believe that, okay, I want to do things right now, and even if the action shows a year down the line, I'm okay with it. And to be able to have that mental peace, I think, is a superpower, where you can start something small today so that it compounds a year, whatever your timeline may be, is a strength. So I guess, those are the things. I mean, a lot to work upon, because I think I can be doing way better in terms of my own peace sometimes, because, it's 1-2% of the times when things don't go your way, and it feels like, okay, is this even worth it, or why am I doing this? Where you start questioning yourself. And it is in those times where you need a lot of strength. And I feel as of now, I've been able to keep at it because I have a larger goal in mind, and I continue enjoying the journey so well, right? I know that, okay, even after everything, even if nobody listens to my podcast, am I learning? And I often ask myself this question, right? And I know that I am. And so as long as that stands, I think I'm good.
I love that, and I'm super proud for the way you've even that it requires a lot of self-talking, and for you to adjust your beliefs and tell yourself things, and especially when things are not working out, how are you talking to yourself? It's very, very important to be kind. And a very smart thing you spoke about was accountability, right? You learn that you are in control. Every choice that you're making is something that you've signed up for, and as long as that is there, you are in the driver's seat, right? You're never at the mercy of your environment. Which I feel like is incredibly smart, and you're very, very wise. And I'm super happy to, listen to that. And, there's a question we ask everyone on the podcast is, are you happy?
I like to think I am. And I was reading this quote where happiness is so much to do with satisfaction, right? Because it's about making peace with your current circumstance more than anything else. And I feel wherever I am, while I continue striving for something more, it is not a desire anymore. It's a goal, and it's something that comes along the way. But so much of it is just being very satisfied and enjoying the journey. And I feel with everything that's happening with me, mostly a good professional job wherein I enjoy what I do, and I love to show up each day. With the podcast where it's been 90 weeks, and with every new episode, I am equally nervous and excited. And as long as that stays, I think those are the things I continue asking myself, right? Okay, if I'm not preparing well for a podcast, I feel, am I not giving it my all? Am I tired? Is it becoming very mechanical for me? And okay, there will be, I wouldn't lie, it's not all gloomy, right? So, I will feel that 5% of the times. But as long as a majority, or a rather good majority, 75 to 80% of the time of any activity I'm enjoying, I'm in control, I'm satisfied with, I believe I'll be happy. And I think that's falling in place for me as of now. And I continue hoping that it does in the future as well with everything that I do.
It's a very interesting concept to compare happiness with satisfaction. And again, that kind of puts you in the driver's seat because you are continuously moving the needle and doing things that make you satisfied, like working hard. That releases a lot of dopamine, and choosing to, work on your podcast and choosing to show up at work instead of idly wasting time. So I think that's amazing. And just to change up the tone a little bit, what would you say is your favorite kind of music?
And music, I'm mostly the kind of, let's say, slow music. I'm a huge Bollywood fan, but not in the rock sense of it. I don't like too loud music or too fast music. I'm happy to dance with my own close circle, but otherwise I'm not a party person. But I think good slow songs with decent lyrics are my kind. And Bollywood, I'm not too much of a Hollywood fan, or I'm not that great with too many English songs. That's just my style.
What would you say are your top 5 artists?
Top 5 artists. Musicians. I love Amit Trivedi. I love Pratik Kuhar. I love Arijit Singh. And beyond them, I think Farhan Akhtar is a great musician. He's written really well as well.
Yeah.
And a fifth one. I think Lucky Ali recently is this singer that I like. So yeah, I think that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I would like to ask you, what would you say is your dream, ambition, or end goal?
Yeah, I think that's, I guess a tough one in the sense that Nawal says this, right? I think the quote he says is, it's easier to know what you want to do. It's more difficult to know why you want to do it. And figuring that out is the more difficult piece, right? And the more challenging one. Because how you want to get somewhere is almost decently easier than why do you want to do it or what do you want to do. Right. So I think having said that, given that the last 2 years have given my life a 180-degree turn, the way I look at goals now is, okay, I want to reach a certain point where these are my, let's say, financial goals. This is my mind space, and this is what my personal life looks like. And if I'm able to quantify that, I want to figure out different paths of getting there. So let's say if I want to continue being a podcaster, I know I want to build the strongest, and I wouldn't use, let's say, the most widely heard podcast, because I think that as a creator, my strength is not audience. My strength is going to be quality content. So if I were to rephrase, I want to become the most successful podcast library of content, where in 5 years, if you're a 20-something-year-old or any age for that matter, and you want to start a company and you're looking for any kind of literature, I hope you go to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. In terms of professional goals, I really want to become, or I want to someday start a company by myself. And if that journey does not happen, I want to continue exploring the founder in me, because so much of what I do with the podcast is not just take a very one-dimensional lens to it, where I think, okay, I'm just going to be a host. I'm going to take multiple dimensions where I'll think of it as a project. What more can I do along with it? And there are a couple of things that are brewing on top of the podcast, and I'd love to see through them, because I think of this as my mini venture where I can, explore myself, where I can do multiple experiments. And that's been the beauty of it. And so I want to follow through on that. And so I know that even if I don't build a company someday, I know I want to be a very, very successful pseudo entrepreneur who's doing a bunch of things that if I continue staying in venture, I'd love to someday, contribute to a bunch of early stage companies and see through to the life cycle of what an investor does for an early stage company. Yeah. So that's on the professional side, with the podcast and how I look at my job. But just like very naively, I'd say that one thing I've learned from the podcast, and which has been my primary learning, is you can not perceive what happens 5 years down the line, but you can be in control of what you want to do for the next 3, 6 or months. And as long as you're challenging yourself and are true to yourself, you will be at a better position than where you were a quarter back. And as long as I'm growing in that stead, I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll figure something out to achieve my dreams. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really love the approach of deciding on, instead of having a very, very rigid 5 year plan and finding yourself being disappointed because things are not turning the way out, because so many times things don't go according to plan, but focusing on the present moment, seeing that I'm doing as much as I can, I'm constantly learning, constantly challenging myself, and having confidence in that, that the compound effect of that is going to lead me to a much, much better position that I can imagine. So, thank you for sharing your dream. And I want to ask you, is there anything that you would like to ask me?
Sure. I'd love to know how you look at, curating the podcast and what remains to be your primary motivation of building out communities. I love what you're doing, and you're incredibly kind as a person. And that message alone meant that, okay, you empathize with, a fellow creator, or even with anybody else. I'd love to know where your original motivation stems from and what keeps you up every day.
I think I understood that it is so important to connect with people, and professionally, because the networking can get you indoors, degrees can't. And also personally, how like how diamonds are polished by other diamonds. I feel like people are polished by other people, interacting with other people. So like you said, of course, like your podcast results in so many professional benefits, but it also helps you like grow as a person like you would have never had otherwise. Irrespective of how much money you've made, or irrespective of what job you've been able to crack. So, getting to know people and understanding their story and thinking what one connection can actually lead to. I never knew my first client I ended up working with would be a guest on my podcast. And I initially started my podcast because I understood that people are the biggest return on investment in building genuine connections with people, not just connecting to for a question answer session on a podcast, but building real relationships. And like you said, I approached podcasts as a way of like you're a person, I'm a person, irrespective of what language. I was able to transcend like language, gender, nationality, age, all these boundaries, because I understood that we're essentially human beings. So my questions were also like a very documentational style. It was lightly scripted in terms of the bullet points I would have, but I wanted to know if genuine questions. If I would look at a human being, I would want to know what's their story. Are they happy? What is it that they do for like their professional life? Do they like it? What is it that we can learn from it and stuff like that. So, and wanting to document that entire process. So just so that people, I hated the concept where people say that oh, someone got lucky. That is why I wanted to document that entire thing. Like someone might end up asking me, how did you get your first client in a New York based tech Web3 startup? I can show after 35 episodes of a podcast, we ended up building that connect, and that's how it happened, right? So I hated the concept of luck always, and I always felt like you're in the driver's seat and you create your own luck. And that's why I started documenting my process of building that network out and finding real life opportunities. I did not know what I'm good at. I did not even know initially what I'm very, very passionate about. So I thought, why not start talking to people, understanding people? And the more I spoke with people, the more I was able to understand about my own self. I was able to see the world through them. Once time I spoke with a serial entrepreneur who was running 5 successful businesses at the time, and I said, how do you do it? Like, that makes no sense. And that was the first time he spoke about LLC, like he believes in partnerships and how he's a partner at 5 companies and how he's giving himself at everything. That was so interesting to find out. Or someone whose job is as like a associate director of like diversity, inclusion, equity. I said, what does your day-to-day look like? So many like learning things. I feel like I look at podcasts as that, like very, very big vessel where I'm continuously learning, and I'm just I wanted to leave a blueprint of anything that I end up building 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, whether it's an amazing job, whether it, is a business or something. I wanted to leave an entire blueprint for the youth so that they can see, like, yes, you start out super awkward, not knowing anything, but you just start. And eventually, like step by step, it really like starts taking its own shape and own identity. So, sorry that was a long answer, but I feel like that was like the reason behind the podcast.
No, I love that. I think, as I mentioned, you're very kind overall. And I think this just goes to show the learning ability that you have and the mindset that you have, more importantly, which I feel is inevitable for anybody's success in the long haul. And it's amazing how you've been able to bring out these stories. I mean, from experience, I can tell you that these are questions which may seem simplistic, but they bring out the true colors of a person, which is
Yeah.
very essential for anybody to figure out. And if you can bring out these stories and it impacts others to, in some shape or form, pursue what they wanted to but were not being able to, I think that's the maximum amount of impact anybody can have. So I think kudos to what you're doing, and incredible job at starting this. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Jivraj. And you know, you might just feel like I'm showering compliments to you, but I'm very, very big on acknowledgement. And I was genuinely flabbergasted when I was watching your episode with Adit. I was completely like doing research on, trying to find out and stuff, and my attention was completely on you in terms of the questions you asked and your 2 cents. And I can't believe the amount of research you do, and not just in terms of the volume of research, but that, like I said, it takes a certain level of emotional intelligence to be able to have the flow of your podcast like that. So I just wanted to make sure that I know how much effort you take, and it's something that really, really shows. So I'm very, very big on like acknowledging stuff. So like, I'm so sure you're going to be like, big would be an understatement, but something amazing is going to come out of it. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Devika. I think that's one of the most kind. Those are one of the most kind words I've gotten from anybody, and it means a lot that you can empathize with the kind of work I'm doing and that you can appreciate it. Because I mean, it's one thing to know and it's one thing to say it out loud. And the kind and generous words you've said mean a lot, genuinely. And I love this conversation as well. I think, as I said, what you're doing is also incredible as a host. Your natural self is wonderful as well, and so much to learn from me. So I think this has been wonderful, and it's glad that one piece of content led to this, and you were able to interact in such a great manner. I'm sure this is only the start for us to collaborate on future projects as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Jivraj. And a bunch of things I want to ask you later, but I'll connect with you personally. I wanted to apply to jobs and stuff, and I told you I'm actively like looking for work. I know you have a meeting at 3:30, so I'm going to let you go. But when you're free next, I would just love to connect, and I'd love to know your advice as to how do you think I should approach different companies, and how should I apply, and like just things like that. So I think your feedback would be extremely, extremely valuable. So I would love to connect otherwise.
Absolutely, Devika. Thanks again for having me. This was really great. I genuinely enjoyed the conversation a lot. And yeah, we're connected anyway. Why don't we chat again sometime during the weekend, perhaps? And I'll share anything that comes along my way. I think so much to be done in the Web3 community space, and it's great that you're championing it. So yeah, kudos to you. And this is lovely.
Thank you, Jivraj. One
Okay.
last question I just wanted to ask you. Would you have any feedback for the podcast? Any way that we could have improved or done better?
I think from the top of my head, the questions are great. It's authentic, they're simple, and they bring out something very, very nice and free flowing. I think they're connected very well as well, because they bring out, I think connection and structure is very important for any conversation, because otherwise it seems like isolated questions. So I think that's there. I mean, broadly, I think it depends upon, overall context depend, like I haven't heard too many episodes earlier. So I think the context part of things may be something that, folks might want to know about more. For instance, I could have also done a better job at, let's say, explaining what my podcast entails, right? So that the audience has more context. That's something I wonder for my show as well. But I think overall as a package, I love what you're doing, and I really hope that this reaches more and more people, because there's some incredible stories which are being told. And yeah, if people can take something out of it, no better service than that.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate how you've been and everything that you're doing. And thank you so much for coming on today's episode. And like you said, really, really looking forward to our future collaborations.
Lovely. Have a great day ahead. Yeah. Thanks for having me again, Devika.
Of
Take
course.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.